I think Dan usually does a chat box for people when we're just getting started. We'll give it a couple minutes, like Melissa was saying. Go ahead and in the chat box type where you are logging in from, if that's the right technology word. Good, loud and clear. We've got Ernest in Atlanta, LA, Boston, Austin, Clarksville, Tennessee, Columbus, Ohio, Vegas, Philly, DC, Kansas City. Congrats to the Chiefs there. San Fran, hello, my good people out in the Bay Area. Michigan, Charlotte, Atlanta, Nashville, Sacramento, Brooklyn. We are covering the Northwest. We've got the Northeast. We've got Central. We've got Southern people in the Southeast. We've got Houston, Calgary, Alberta. Loving it. Recently watched some of the Amazon show Tin Star, which I believe is filmed in Calgary. Very beautiful out there. We've got another person from Canada, Toronto. We've got New Jersey.
Yeah, someone just asked in the Q&A box, will a replay be provided? Yes, we will be sending out a replay at the probably this afternoon. We'll get that sent out just so everyone's aware.
Link not working. We've got Mercy asking about, yes, this is my money tree. It represents all of the countries that I've traveled to. I think we have about 30 world currencies on the tree, which I collected from going to over 40 countries. You've got obviously the euro, which covers a lot of the European countries, but plenty of other currencies on the tree. So when I was little, the quick background on the tree is that I heard the phrase, money doesn't grow on trees. And well, as we all know, you plant a seed of a real estate investment property, you put your capital to work, and you take care of it, you water it, you watch it grow, you improve it, you add value to it, you take care of the residents, and in return, you have a money tree that produces cash flow on a monthly basis. So this is my reminder. And it's also what I collect when I travel. So rather than buying trinkets or items, I just keep a little bit of the local currency from my trip that we go on. So that is the money tree. We've got Florida. Mercy, I'm glad you love it. Start your own, just get a tree and start putting some money on it. Toronto, Scottsdale, Charlotte again, excellent. I'm going to take a break and drink a little bit of coffee, Melissa. So
yeah, go ahead.
From here.
Yeah, so while we're getting started, so I just want to, I'll introduce myself really quick. So I'm Melissa Broom. I work with Dan, Danny, and Brandon for PassiveInvesting.com and Multifamily Investor Nation. So if you haven't seen my face yet, nice to sort of meet you. So we will, I just wanted to mention, so Dan is traveling this week. So we have the privilege of having Danny Randazzo here to discuss discussing due diligence and on a multifamily deal, and he can get a little bit into that, get into detail with that. But before we get started, wanted to mention a new program that Dan is offering called the MFIN Premium membership. So what it is it's Dan says he does not have time for individual training and coaching. It's just not something he wants to do, but he has started a new program called MFIN Premium. Let me put this link in the box. MFINpremium.com. So if you'll go, just go click on MFINpremium.com. I put the link into the chat box. Check it out. There's some really great stuff that Dan's giving those members. So it's a new program. We're offering a free trial right now. So go check it out. Now's the time to get involved, to get the most for your money for the premium membership. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Danny. I'll let you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, and I'll just be in the background if you need anything or if there's any technical difficulties. Okay.
Thank you, Melissa. Tony, thank you for confirming Tin Star. I've really enjoyed the show. I think the countryside out there is beautiful. So if you haven't checked it out or been to Calgary, go out and take a look. Jeffrey, for your question about a little bit of background, I'll do a quick background about myself, but you can also go to our multifamily investing website for passiveinvesting.com. It's the name of our company. We buy value add multifamily deals. We have bios and videos of every team member up there. So check those out. And those are very detailed and thorough. As far as the Multifamily Investor Nation, also check out that website and Facebook group. There's a ton of content, intro videos, explanations about what the group does, and hundreds of webinars available to learn about every step through the multifamily syndication process or acquisition, disposition, 1031 exchanges, all of the fun stuff as far as structuring, raising money, 506C, 506B. So plenty of content out there. That being said, today's webinar is all about performing due diligence, both from a financial and a physical perspective. So we're going to get into that. But for those of you joining for the first time, my name is Danny Randazzo. I am a managing partner with passiveinvesting.com. My background is really that I have done all types of real estate deals. I've done short sales. I've done single family rentals, short-term Airbnb rentals, office building purchases, commercial property, large multifamily. And through all of that experience, I really was able to learn that multifamily is the way to create wealth and cash flow that doesn't get disrupted. With a single family rental, you may have a pipe that bursts and costs $5,000 to repair. Well, that may eat up all of your cash flow and thus leaving you for that year underperforming or making $0 at all, versus having large multifamily deals that you're invested in or acquiring. You have the ability to cover those kind of not so common expenses, but because there's so many units and fewer individual pipes, not every property or building has its own individual that may cost you 5,000 times 100 units, and it's just a kind of a numbers game. So that's the reason why I like multifamily. And you can, any history on the new build, 240 units and up. I'm not sure, Jeffrey, that I follow that question, but maybe reach out to me privately and we can try to address it later on. I want to jump into our content for today. So as you're getting prepared for the upcoming content, do you buy duplexes? No. Our group today, we focus on 150 units or more, greater than $30 million, built between 1995 and 2010. We are looking at B to A minus A class products that we can hold for a long term and do value add investing on. So today's content, it's all about due diligence. So again, I want to recap the two types of due diligence that we're going to dive into today are the physical side and the financial side. So starting from a physical perspective, there are a lot of activities that need to be done before you go and acquire or purchase a property. When we go through these, don't think that you have to physically be there to do every single one of these items, but someone from your team needs to be there, and your team does not have to be a full-time employee that you hire, but a team member can be a vendor that you work with and any supporting member to your, greater team. However, as the buyer, if you are looking to actively acquire your own deals in the multifamily space, you are ultimately responsible for ensuring that all of these activities are done from a diligence perspective. If you are raising money, again, you need to be extremely thorough and diligent in completing every single task that we're going to cover today, because you want to avoid buying and closing any deal where you have surprises. So you will have some obstacles and challenges that you encounter as you purchase and close and stabilize an asset, but you want to avoid any surprises that could have been avoided through proper due diligence. So before it's under contract, on the physical side, you need to drive the property. You need to make sure that the surrounding areas are as you expect them to be. For today's content, I'm really just going to talk about the areas that we invest in. And so we look for really nice neighborhoods. This would be a neighborhood where maybe Whole Foods is a 10 or 15-minute drive away. So we want to make sure that the feel of that neighborhood is really good. We want to make sure that there are convenient commercial kind of strip malls or amenities around the asset that people use. So like I said, Whole Foods would be one, maybe your fast food chains, maybe a Starbucks, banks, whatever convenient amenities people use on a regular basis, good restaurants, maybe some walkability if there is anything to local restaurants or nightlife or entertainment. So we drive the property, we make sure from a physical perspective, everything is as we think it should be and as it's been kind of marketed to us. So ensuring that the roofs are of good quality, that the foundation is good, all of that you need to do. And then we also spend a lot of time driving and checking the surrounding areas, what types of retail and services are available. In addition to the surrounding areas, we'll do a detailed comp analysis of similar properties to see what amenities they have on site, what types of rents are they getting, what types of finishes and fixtures do they have. And of course, you want to go and tour these comparable properties to make sure from a physical perspective that the units feel the same if you're trying to be like them or add value similar to what another asset nearby has done. Once you have the property under contract, typically this is where you'll be able to outline in your PSA, your purchase and sales agreement, some of those due diligence terms. Once you have the property under PSA, so under contract, it is everything that you want to do. As a buyer, you are really in control and need to take control of your due diligence timeframe. So one of the things that you need to do right away is do a property inspection. So what we typically do is we'll partner with the management company that we will have managing the asset for us, and we'll do a physical inspection of every single door and space on the property. So that means entering every single unit. Very common practice and very common procedure when you are doing your due diligence. It's a major haul, but usually on 150 unit plus, you can do it in about 2 or 3 days. And the seller should be very willing and able to help coordinate that to ensure that you get into all those units. You'll also have some lender requirements, and I always encourage people to get these diligence items out of the way as soon as possible. So in addition to your own personal inspection, the lender is going to want to do some site visits. They may have some environmental surveys. They may need to do an appraisal of the property. So schedule those as soon as possible once you have it under PSA, so you have as much time during the due diligence phase as you can to ensure the quality of that asset. Always keep a checklist of what your inspection procedures, what you want to hit, And a qualified management company will have their own, what they call unit walk checklist. And so if the management company doesn't have that, create your own checklist, find your own checklist, or work with a company that does, so you can make sure that you're looking at every single major item. You know, one of the things that we look at is that all of the appliances are in good working condition, which number one, they should be. If somebody is living in that unit already, verify that those appliances are working. And then a big thing that we do when we look at value add, we actually use the unit walk to help us solidify our CapEx budget for renovation. So if we're looking at a 150 unit building and 75 of the units have new appliances, that means we probably only need to buy 75 new appliances for the units that have old appliances. So use that unit walk as not only your physical due diligence inspection, but also helping gather information for your value add plan if you're going to do that. Lastly, from a physical perspective, look for any deferred maintenance that may be occurring on the property. So are the roofs old? Are there major cracks or potholes in the parking lot or driveways? That's typically a lender issue. If the parking lot or pavement is in bad condition, they'll typically require a pretty hefty holdback of reserve escrow at closing to ensure that that deferred maintenance can be repaired. And then, of course, checking the major systems of the property. We mean electrical, plumbing, roof, siding, exterior, and I think those are really the major systems. Any sort of like grounds as well, landscaping. Are there many diseased trees on the property that need to be removed? So just all of those physical items. And I'm going to pause here and check the Q&A box to see if we have any questions on a physical perspective. Let's see, Jeffrey, buy land, build a new Class A. We do not do any development, Jeffrey. We perform third-party due diligence. I watched your investor greeting video. The software used for estimating costs on roofs and other renovations, it is a proprietary software that a lot of insurance adjusters use. So Brandon's background as an insurance adjuster, he has access to this software where he can, it's really cool, from a physical due diligence, he can fly this drone up in the air and it takes real-time measurements. It also checks for the squareness and structural soundness of a building. So if a roof line is angled or sloping one way or the other, it can actually flag it. So I unfortunately don't have the name of that software, but if you look up insurance adjuster estimation software, you'll probably find it there. We have the last question in here about physical due diligence, and folks, feel free to ask any questions that you have right now about physical due diligence before we wrap up and jump into financial due diligence. The last question I have in here, Axio, yes, that is Exactimate, I think is the software. Do I need an expert to do physical? I think evaluation is the word that you're looking for. Yes, I would have an experienced professional out there doing it. Typically for us, the management company is experienced enough. You need to know what to look for, kind of what red flags. One example, if you're looking at lower end C class or D class apartments that, or the vintage is a little bit older, maybe like 1970 timeframe, you need to know what to look for to check to see if there is an issue. So a common thing that we see people do on older vintage properties is if you go and either sit on top of a toilet and kind of shake it a little bit, you can actually tell if there's any leaking from an old O-ring on a toilet causing water to seep and rot the subfloor. And so if you sit on it and you kind of shake it a little bit, you'll be able to tell if it is rotted underneath, which can be a huge expense to fix the subfloor, fix the plumbing. And so having a professional who knows these like tips and tricks or what to look for is going to save you thousands and thousands of dollars. So pay for a pro, or typically your management company will do it complimentary if you hire them on to manage the asset. How do you check the plumbing behind the drywall? Again, you should have an expert who can kind of tell if paint or ceilings look like they have some yellowing spots where there may be some leaking water. You can, and I do recommend, there was a question in here about scoping the sewer lines. Absolutely recommend doing that. Depending on the size of your project. And again, if you have a qualified pro, they can probably say, hey, look, if there's, I'm making this up, if there's 50 sewer lines on the property, maybe you do a sample of 5. And if the professional plumber says, hey, 10% sample is going to be pretty darn good since these were all installed and built at the same time. Also, depending on the vintage, maybe if it's a property built in the 1950s, maybe you want to sample all of the sewer lines, and doing a quick scope for a few $100, well worth it to avoid potentially tens of thousands of dollars in repairs. Can I learn these skills? You can. I would think the best way to learn them is obviously by doing. So I would go see if friends or a mentor is buying an apartment community, and you can go and walk and kind of shadow and learn. I don't think there's enough videos out there where you could sit at home without being in the unit and seeing some of these things. If you're going to be buying a property yourself and taking on investor money, I highly recommend you have a professional. We have pros that do it on every single asset. Despite having the experience and knowing what to look for, I still want to pay for a pro to do that and make sure that nothing is missed. So that's what I would encourage you to do. Either shadow and gain some experience, but still, if you're buying a property that's, 50 units, 10 units, even 150 units, you're going to want to have somebody check to ensure that from a physical due diligence perspective, everything is sound and as you expect it to be. Shifting over to the financial side. Before you have the property under contract, there's a couple of things to look at, and it's all about the numbers at this point in time. So financial due diligence, you're going to want to review the T12, the trailing 12 months, the last 12 months of income and expenses that the owner has provided, and a rent roll to make sure that the numbers make sense, everything matches up. And again, if you're not a strong numbers person, you need to have a pro look at it. Typically, if you're going to have a management company manage your asset, they would be able to help look at a T12 and a rent roll to say, hey, there's some anomalies, the numbers make sense or the numbers don't make sense. Once you have the property under contract, again, it's your time for due diligence. If a seller can't provide financial documents that you're asking for and it does not make sense, I would be questioning, what are they hiding? Why are they not providing and being transparent with their financial records? It would definitely be a concern. If you have a mom and pop owner who uses a notebook or a 3-ring binder to manage the asset still, you're going to need to get comfortable with however they do it. And if it is on a limited set of data, I would just make sure that you're really comfortable with the numbers, because you're also, if you're going to have a lender provide debt on the asset, you're also going to have the lender review. And if the numbers don't make sense, you probably won't get a loan. So work together with your lender to make sure if you have a mom and pop seller who has bad records, that you're getting something that makes sense and is usable. In most of those cases, you're going to be buying it at a pretty nice discount because they are disorganized, and there's probably some financial leakage on the property, meaning they're not collecting all of the income or they're not tracking all of their expenses. So I would make sure you're buying it at a good price there. Major steps once you have the property under contract in financial due diligence, you need to do a lease audit. So this is typically done at the same time with the unit walkthrough. From a physical perspective, the management team would bring a couple of folks on to actually go through the paper copies of the leases or the electronic copies of the leases and make sure that they match to the rent roll. You want to check and make sure that there's no hidden concessions. You want to check that there's no last month's free rent that would be affected in your purchasing. You want to check and make sure that the rent price matches what they pay in the rent roll. You want to check that if the lease file says that there's a security deposit paid, does it match and is it tracked to the rent roll? Are all of those numbers matching per the lease agreement? Are they charging for pet fees? Because again, if the lease doesn't say that you have to pay a pet rent per month and the rent roll has it, the resident could say, hey, we're not going to pay this anymore. And it could affect how much income you collect. So again, very important to look at all of these details and make sure that the numbers make sense. Look at all of the contracts that are in place at the property to see if you can assume them or if you want to cancel them. Some of the things that we've seen at our properties is there would be a snack vendor that we don't need to assume that contract. We don't need to pay a premium for coffee K-cups and snack bag size chips to be delivered to the property. We can just have the manager of the property buy those on a weekly or a monthly basis and not pay a premium for it. So look at all of those service contracts and see what you need to assume, what you want to assume, and then what you can hopefully cancel and save money on. If you are Another important step in the financial due diligence is getting the last 2 or 3 years of income and expenses to see if there's any anomalies or unusual expense items. So one area that we've seen is higher than normal plumbing repairs. And you definitely want to hone in on some of these anomaly expenses to see what the explanation is. So at one asset, it could be that a building had a sewer line that broke and it was $10,000 to fix it. Well, from a 2 or 3 year view of the financials, you would see plumbing as 10 grand higher in a month, and that would stick out. So look through the last 2 or 3 years and see what numbers stick out as being unusual from an income or an expense side, and ask questions about them. If it doesn't make sense, keep asking until it does. Otherwise, you may not want to buy the asset. I'm going to just do some rapid fire areas to look at as well. Check out the concessions, check out security deposits. We already talked about that. Any move in or move out consistencies or inconsistencies with the property. Is there a ton of seasonality? Are you maybe near a university and you get a lot of people that leave for the summer and don't pay rent in May and June, or June and July? So look for those types of anomalies. And then in your due diligence process, you're also going to have, in addition to yours that you do with the property manager, you're going to have the lender who's going to do their due diligence as well and ask some good questions too. So I like having that kind of dual diligence approach where we do our own and then the lender comes in. They're also going to do some lease audits. They're going to review the income and expenses from the property. They're going to look at the area. They're going to compare the asset performance to like-kind properties within the same geography. So it'll be a good opportunity to kind of compare notes and vet your business plan against what the lender thinks the property should be doing. I can't stress it enough. If you are not a numbers person, you need someone on your team who is. It is one of the most important parts to making sure that you're buying an asset and that you're buying a good deal. You do not want to get under contract. You do not want to close on a deal where the financial metrics are going to change drastically on the day you close because you did not do your due diligence. So if you are not a numbers person, get someone on your team who can be. This doesn't have to be a full-time employee. It could be a contractor. You could utilize your relationship with a manager, a property manager. You could also utilize the help of a mentor or someone who's very experienced, have them help you, and in return, compensate them in some form or fashion. So with that, we're about 30 minutes into it. And that's really all I had. I kind of went through the physical side. I went through the financial side. For the last bit of today's webinar, I will answer any questions on the financial due diligence, and then we'll kind of open it up for any broader Q&A type of activity. So I'm going to jump back to the chat box real quick, and then I'll go to the Q&A box. Let's see, if not, how much do you usually pay for the pro? So when we do these inspections, our property manager will help us and they will invoice us probably about $5,000 to do some of the activities in the physical and some activities in the financial. But again, we're there side by side with them going through this to make sure that everything is as we expect it to be. And again, you as the buyer, you as the general partner bringing in investors, you are responsible. It's not the professional, it's you. So what they will do is they will charge us for it, but they will waive that fee if they take on the management going forward. And that's a pretty common practice within the property management industry. To help with the physical inspection, they'll waive the fee if they can manage it going forward. Typically, industry standard is about 30 days of due diligence within your purchase and sale agreement. You usually have about 30 days to do your due diligence. And then after due diligence is complete, you have 30 days to close. This is very common practice amongst the 150 unit plus multifamily deals. It may be different for smaller unit sizes, but again, 30 and 30 is pretty typical. 30 days due diligence and then 30 days to close after that. You may have an accelerated timeline for a smaller property. You know, if you're buying a 2 or 4 unit, you should be able to do your due diligence in a couple of days and feel pretty comfortable with what you're buying. When doing the lease audit, do you use any tools to manage the process? It depends what, it depends. I have not seen any like artificial intelligence tools or software. Really doing the lease audit is pretty time consuming. You go through the leases, but once you know where to look for, you know, what they pay in rent, what additional rents do they pay, you know, looking at the lease either on the screen or if they have paper copies, flipping through and checking things off on a list. I would say Excel would probably be a good tool to use. The rough cost per door for due diligence, it really depends. Physical a physical due diligence for a small, like 2 or 4 unit property, you may be looking at a few $100s for your typical inspector. A lot of inspection companies may do a hybrid approach for seasoned investors. So I'd say talk to them, figure out what you are comfortable with and what you need. For 150 unit plus, the cost per door, really have a good relationship with your management company, and they will typically waive the fee if they're going to take on the asset and manage it going forward. On historical financials, what is the approximate total operating expense versus gross income that you are seeing? A rough rule of thumb, I would say, is about 50%. As you get to 150 units in size, that number may come down to about 40 to 45%, but 50% is a great rule of thumb to start with. It depends so much on the vintage of the asset. So I would say if it's an 80s product or older, meaning it was built in 1980s or older, you're probably going to have a higher ratio than 50% because your R&M and your turnover, and R&M is repair and maintenance, is going to be pretty high because it's an old product that requires a lot of upkeep. You probably will have a greater than 50% ratio. If you have a new product recently built in 2010, ideally you should have a less than 50% ratio of expenses to gross income. Besides matching up the leases to the rent roll, do you also ask for bank statements to compare what is deposited? Absolutely, you should ask for bank statements. When we look at 150 unit plus properties, we actually have a statement in the purchase and sale agreement, which this is not going to be common in smaller size deals. But in the larger size deals, there's actually a statement if the seller has lied or provided incorrect financial information, we would have recourse action against them, and could undo the sale or go after them financially for basically lying to us. So on those larger properties, it's less common to verify with deposits and bank statements. You absolutely can do that, and I would encourage everyone to do that. With the smaller size deals, I would absolutely do that. I think another important one is that mom and pop owner. If you're buying like a 10 or 50 unit deal and they can't provide you clear bank statements, I would, again, just kind of be puzzled as to why. And the common answer you'll get is they probably commingle funds with other properties. But really, you should tell them to go through with a highlighter and highlight the deposits that match for this property and do that. Does finding problems affect the due diligence period? Well, absolutely. So the whole point of physical and financial due diligence is to validate that you're buying the asset you expect it to be. If there is an issue, excuse me, if there is an issue uncovered in due diligence that you don't feel comfortable with, you have two options. Number one, you could back out of the deal because you found something that you cannot get past. I would not recommend pursuing that option right off the bat, but option two would be you go back to the broker or you go back to the seller and you talk about what issue you found and how to negotiate a resolution to that issue. So if you find that in the physical due diligence, all of the refrigerators on the property are going to die in the next 24 hours, you may put in the contract that the current seller replace all refrigerators before closing. Or the seller could give you a credit as the buyer for all new refrigerators. Just think through things. As you uncover things that don't make sense or make you nervous or uncomfortable, I would figure out how you get comfortable. And a lot of the times you may need to have a conversation with the broker or the seller to see how you can come to a resolution of each issue uncovered in due diligence, if you have any. I'm currently seeing properties around Vegas and Phoenix with 30 to 35% expense ratios. The brokers are saying values have gone up substantially while expenses have not. Are you seeing much lower expense ratios in high growth markets, or do you think there is something wrong with all properties in these hot markets? 30 to 35% seems very, very difficult to believe. I would really ask from a T12 perspective, I would need to understand, what's the vintage of the property, how many units is it, and what is the demographic of the property? Because typically over the last 12 months, if you are replacing old rents with higher rents, let's just say they're double. If you're renting an apartment for $1,000 and you go up to 2,000, I would not think that your expenses would be that low. It's not impossible that they could be. I would just think something doesn't make sense. And you're probably looking at something that's smaller than 100 units. From that perspective, I would look to see if they're missing expenses. Dan and I actually did a 2-part webinar series that is available on the MFIN page about underwriting, everything about the numbers. And we go into very good detail about all of the expenses multifamily properties have and the typical cost per door. It is geared towards larger units, like 100 units and up, but these kind of rules of thumb and these expenses are all going to be found in smaller size units. The price per door may not match to what we put in there, but you need to look for all of those expenses. So to answer your question, Kyle, I think, Andrew, 30 to 35% seems really low. I would go through the expenses with a fine-tooth comb and see what's missing or what doesn't make sense, and ask some questions. Too optimistic and seeing rent growth of 3% and cover inflation percentage. Leonardo, that question is very specific to markets. There are some markets around the country where rent growth will probably be 5% this year and is expected to continue that trend. These would be very high growth markets. And I think you need to do your due diligence on comps and the submarket when looking at deals and opportunities. And if you are an investor who is trying to vet other operators to invest with, I would ask these questions if they're presenting a deal in a tertiary market like Biloxi, Mississippi, and they are projecting 3% growth rate. I would ask them why, and I would have them provide a data set to support their theory of 3% growth. It just seems unlikely in some of these tertiary markets where you would get 3% growth. So I would say look at that and ask some questions until you're comfortable. Let me jump over to the Q&A box and try to answer what I can. Video replay, we got that one. Average cost per door for due diligence, we talked about that. When you do your walkthroughs, do you need to note each of the serial numbers? No, I would not think you need to note the appliance serial numbers for each of those. We don't do that. PSA is the purchase and sale agreement, or your contract, your buying contract, or your purchase and sale agreement. Say lender wanted to check environmental survey, you, the buyer, have the pleasure of paying that fee. The buyer or the lender passes on all of their costs to you as the buyer. So if an environmental survey is required, which it is very common amongst 150 unit plus apartment communities, you're going to pay $1,000, $1,500, maybe $2,000 for an environmental survey. You can try to use a previous survey if the seller of the asset had a survey done within the past couple of years. Each lender is different, so they may or may not use that survey. We've also had success in the past of calling the same environmental company who did the last survey, if the seller of the asset had one, and have them do a survey update, and they will do it at a little bit less of a cost. And again, the buyer is going to pay for that lovely fee. Do you recommend estoppels? If so, how often? Yes, an estoppel is basically a notification that goes out to all of the residents stating that they are in compliant, they confirm they have a lease in place, they confirm they pay this amount, rent is due on the first of the month, and that as of this date, typically your closing date, any previous grievances or issues must be filed against the previous owner, and you as the new owner are held harmless to anything that happened at the property before this date. And yes, I would do estoppels. It's very common to do those on every deal, and your real estate closing attorney can help you do that. Typically, the seller will deliver the estoppels to their residents just before closing. And so I would have your attorney review that estoppel to make sure you as the buyer are protected and it meets your requirements as well. How much cash flow do you look at per door? This varies greatly amongst property sizes. I think the rule of thumb out there for like 2 to 4 units is like $250 a door. It's very market specific. So Brad, what I would say to you is network with some people in your local area or in the areas where you want to invest, and figure out what types of returns they're getting and what to look for. But again, you need to figure out what aligns with your goal. So theoretically, you could be an investor who doesn't want any cash flow each month. This is nothing that I would ever do, but doesn't want any cash flow, and they want to buy in an area where the market is expected to grow over the next 20 years, and they're going to invest it and kind of set it and forget it and hold for long-term appreciation. So it varies. And I would check and meet with other investors in the area where you want to invest and see what types of returns they're getting. I think I answered the estoppel question. If there's another question on estoppels, Robert, let me know if I did not answer that. What length bridge loan to obtain value add loan? Does loan amount include rehab? Yes, all types of bridge loans and lenders out there. The most common type of bridge loan is a 3-1-1 term, meaning you have the loan for 3 years. You have the option to exercise a 1-year extension, and another 1-year extension. Typically, bridge loans will include the rehab or renovation budget. I would have conversations with 5 to 10 investors or one really good loan broker to help you shop for the best bridge loan for your product or for your investment, for your property, and make sure that it meets the needs that you have as the owner, as the buyer. What about when closing a Fannie Mae loan? 60 days isn't enough. Ernest, yes, you can close a Fannie Mae loan in 60 days. You need to be diligent in getting all of your documentation to them, and all of that done. Very common with 60 days. And what I would also do is, if you're going to negotiate a PSA with 30 days due diligence, 30 days to close after that, I would also have some sort of extension option. If your lender, for whatever reason, is delayed, you have an option to extend closing by another 30 days. So if you're buying a property today, theoretically, you have 30 days to do due diligence. So that takes you to March 4th, and then 30 days, which takes you to April, and then a 30-day extension, which would take you to May. So you can do that. 60 days is enough to get a loan done. So be diligent in getting all your documents to them. How do you choose property management companies? I think we've done a webinar on what to look for when selecting a property management company, but Art Small, my recommendation is talk to a bunch of management companies and get references from them of investors that they work with, and make sure to ask all of your questions about how they handle things. One good question to always make sure to ask about is what happens if there's an after hours emergency at the property, like a water leak that gets reported. How do they handle that? And I would always check with the reference around that. Robert, I'm glad we got the estoppel answers for you. Art Small, what are the hot markets? Do you purchase any properties on the East Coast? If so, where? There's great markets all around the country. It depends on what your goals are and what you want to achieve for your investments. Our group, passiveinvesting.com, we only invest in the Southeast US. We look at markets like Raleigh and Charlotte, North Carolina, Charleston and Greenville, South Carolina, Atlanta, Georgia, Jacksonville, and Orlando, Florida. That's it. If you send me the best deal ever in Biloxi, Mississippi, it's going to be thank you, but it's a pass for us. So we're very strict in our criteria. I recommend you do the same. Figure out what markets meet your investment goals and invest there. Don't chase a hot market because someone says rents doubled in Phoenix last year. For how many years is the average loan on a multifamily property? It depends on what loan type you have, Eric. So I would talk to a lender and speak to them about the multifamily loan products that they offer. You can have some shorter duration loans like a bridge. Maybe it's 3 years with a couple extension options. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are typically fixed rate financing. Their loans are good for about 10 years, sometimes 12 years. So it really depends. With that, we've got just a few minutes left. I have answered all of the questions in the Q&A box. Let me jump back to the chat box and see if I missed anything there. And before we wrap up, feel free to ask any last minute questions. And I'm going to see where we're at. I'm frequently seeing. We did that one. We did that one. Is it a deal breaker for you if the seller refuses to provide estoppels? I would ask why. Really, it shouldn't be up to the seller to provide an estoppel or not. It should be you as the buyer. So I would just negotiate on that point and figure out what the hesitation is, and I would speak to my attorney about it to make sure that we are protected. But typically there shouldn't be a reason to not do it. It just protects everybody involved. So it's a pretty common practice. Well, thank you, Multifamily Investor Nation, so much for joining us today in talking about physical and financial due diligence. I appreciate all of your participation and great questions today. I'm going to answer one final question and then we will sign off. I will have Melissa jump back on and do any last minute announcements. So Melissa, please jump back on and join us if you are still available. I'm going to answer this question from Kyle, and then I'm going to turn it over to you for closing announcements, and we will log off for the afternoon. How do you decide whether to sell or refinance? Kyle, this question is all about the numbers. So you need to evaluate what your returns are and what your investment goals are. So selling a property may be good if you have another property to roll that money into and buy a better asset. Refinancing may be a really good option for you to get some capital back from a refi and maybe get some better debt in place and hold the property for another several years to cash flow. And so that may be your goal, to continue to have cash flow there. But really, it's all about the numbers and it's all about your goals with what you want to do, whether to sell or refinance. So it's all about evaluating that. With that, Melissa, to you to close us out for the afternoon.
That was great. Thanks, Danny. We're glad to have you speak today. Yes, so just wanted to say one more quick thing about mfimpremium.com. So go to www.mfimpremium.com. Check out, it's a new program that that the Multifamily Investor Nation, Dan Handford, is offering. There's some really great content. I know a lot of you are starting out in the business or maybe even more seasoned, but it's really for everybody. There's weekly group coaching calls, some great access to some back-end passiveinvesting.com things that Dan shares with the group. So definitely go and take a look at that. It's definitely worth a few minutes looking into it. We will have actually a special webinar at the end of the week on Thursday, I believe. It's with CoStar. So CoStar is going to be doing a webinar Thursday, I believe, at noon. Let me just double check my calendar. Yep, 12 o'clock on Thursday. You'll get an email about that information. So if you're interested in learning more about CoStar, we'll have their reps on a live webinar with us doing some demos and showing us how their system works. So, all right, thank you everyone for joining us today, and we will see you next time.